You are what you think. How Mindset Becomes Identity, written by Ronnie Rowland, published by Growth Literacy Lounge. You become what you think about. Earl Nightingale. At some point, you've probably looked in the mirror and asked yourself, why do I keep doing this? You make promises you don't keep. You second-guess decisions. You sabotage progress just when it starts to feel real. It's not because you're broken. It's not because you lack discipline or potential. It's because you're thinking from an outdated version of you, and no one ever taught you how to upgrade that voice. This book isn't about changing what you do. It's about changing the story behind what you do, because whether you realize it or not, every decision you make is driven by thought. Not the conscious, logical kind, but the quiet, repeated ones you've rehearsed for years. Thoughts like, I'm not ready, I always mess this up, or that's just who I am. Over time, those thoughts become beliefs. Beliefs become patterns. And patterns harden into identity. But here's the truth most people never hear. Identity isn't discovered, it's designed. Not by accident, but by intention. And the raw material isn't your job title, your past, or your personality type. It's your thoughts. If you change what you think consistently, you change who you become eventually. Inside these pages, we won't just talk about mindset, we'll build it. Together, we'll explore the science of how thoughts rewire the brain, why your internal narrator matters more than your resume, and how to shift identity from the inside out. You'll learn how to spot the loops that keep you stuck and rewrite the ones that launch you forward. This isn't a motivational pep talk. This is a manual for mental transformation. It's practical, actionable, and designed to help you take back authorship over your inner life. Because the truth is, you're not at the mercy of your thoughts. You're the one choosing them, and every thought you choose is casting a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. So the question isn't, can I really change? The question is, am I ready to think like the version of me who already has? Let's find out. Chapter 1. Think like the future you. He stands in the mirror, his shoulders squared, his voice calm, and his eyes clear. You barely recognize him, but he's you. Not the version weighed down by doubt or replaying past failures, but the one who made it through. The one who learned how to lead, to speak up, to stop apologizing for existing. He doesn't flinch at criticism or shrink from challenges. He responds, not out of fear, but from a place of quiet certainty. That version of you already exists. The only thing separating you from him is repetition. Most people think identity is a discovery. You dig deep enough, peel back enough layers, and eventually you find your true self. But identity isn't something you find, it's something you build. Every action you take, every risk you avoid, every thought you repeat is another brick in the house of who you're becoming. And thoughts are the blueprint. What if instead of asking, who am I, you asked, who do I want to become? And then, how would that version of me think in this moment? Not what would they do, but what would they think? Because action follows thought. The more you think like the person you're becoming, the more you become them. It sounds simple, maybe even naive, but it's not wishful thinking. It's neuroscience. Your brain is a pattern machine. It takes whatever you think repeatedly and builds highways for those thoughts. Say you constantly think, I always mess things up. Your brain notices and begins filtering your experiences to reinforce that belief. But when you start thinking, I'm learning how to lead, your brain responds the same way, by building pathways to support that story. This process is called neuroplasticity, and it means your identity is less like a fossil and more like clay. Moldable, movable, alive. The key is not to fake it. You don't become confident by pretending. You become confident by rehearsing the thoughts that confident people think. They're not afraid of failing, they expect it, learn from it, and keep going. They don't tie their worth to outcomes. They speak up even when their voice shakes. You can borrow those thoughts. Not to deceive yourself, but to train your brain to accept a new default. The mind doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality, it simply follows the instructions you repeat most often. But don't expect overnight change. This isn't a one-time switch, it's reps. Mental reps. When fear shows up, think like the future you. When self-doubt whispers, answer it from the identity you're stepping into. Ask, what would the future version of me believe right now? And then believe it, on purpose. At first it'll feel like wearing someone else's clothes. But keep showing up in those thoughts, and eventually they'll fit. You don't need a 10-year plan. You need a 10-second thought you're willing to think on repeat. The smallest shift in mindset, held consistently, begins to shape your next decision. That decision shapes your behavior. That behavior shapes your self-perception. And slowly, silently, the version of you in the mirror starts to look more familiar. This isn't self-help fluff. It's how the mind works. You become the thoughts you trust most. So trust wisely. The future you is already whispering back through the noise of your present fear. Tune in, borrow his thoughts, and start thinking like him today. The future version of you already exists. You build him by thinking like him now. Repeated thoughts create mental wiring that becomes identity. Small mindset shifts held consistently have compounding effects over time. What thought does the future version of you repeat that you haven't started practicing yet? When facing a challenge today, pause and ask, what would the future me believe in this moment? Then act from that thought. Chapter 2. The lie of that's just who I am. It usually shows up like a shrug. Someone points out a pattern, how you shut down during conflict or avoid opportunities, and you say it without thinking. That's just who I am. It feels honest, even humble. But that sentence is a prison dressed up as self-awareness. It's not truth, it's resignation. And it's probably not even accurate. No one is born with a fixed identity. You weren't handed a script at birth that said, you will be anxious in social settings, or you will fear public speaking, or you will always second-guess yourself. Those traits weren't coded into your DNA. They were shaped. Shaped by repeated experiences, reinforced beliefs, and the thoughts you accepted as facts. Saying that's just who I am skips over all the shaping, and worse, it cements the shape as permanent. What you're really saying is, this is who I've trained myself to be, probably without realizing it. It's a comforting excuse because it lets you off the hook. If you were born that way, then you're not responsible. But if you were shaped by thoughts and patterns, then you're also capable of reshaping them. That's where the discomfort comes in. Responsibility is heavy, but it's also liberating. Let's say you're someone who panics under pressure. You've told yourself, I've just never been good in high-stress situations. But what if that's just a neural groove? A well-worn pathway your brain takes because it's traveled it 100 times before? Neuroplasticity tells us that every thought and emotional reaction strengthens those mental pathways. The more you say I can't handle pressure, the more your brain ensures that's true, but the opposite is also possible. Start thinking, pressure reveals my creativity, and over time your brain will start wiring around that narrative instead. The danger of that's just who I am is that it quietly becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you're bad with money, you'll avoid learning about it. If you believe you're not a leader, you'll step back when opportunities arise. You live down to your belief. Even if the belief was never based on truth, identity isn't hardwired. It's practiced. Think of identity like a playlist. Each belief is a song you've hit repeat on. Some of those songs were added when you were too young to understand what you were absorbing, things a teacher said, how a parent reacted, how a failure felt. But now, as an adult, you're the one in charge of the cue. You don't have to keep playing the same tracks. Here's the shift: stop defending your limitations and start challenging them. Instead of saying, that's just who I am, ask, is this who I want to be? If the answer is no, don't cling to it like it's your truth. Let it go like it's outdated software. Because that's exactly what it is. Your brain will install whatever you give it, so stop downloading beliefs that keep you stuck. You're not fixed, you're fluid, and every time you repeat a thought, you're either reinforcing an identity that limits you or building one that frees you. The next time that old sentence rises up, that's just who I am, catch it, question it, replace it. You're not a finished product, you're a sculptor with clay in your hands, and the work isn't done yet. That's just who I am is often a limiting belief, not a truth. Identity is shaped by repeated thoughts, not fixed traits. Neuroplasticity proves we can rewire who we become by changing what we practice. What part of your identity have you been defending that might actually be outdated? Catch yourself saying or thinking that's just who I am today. Replace it with, is that still true, or just practiced? Chapter 3. The Power of One Thought. He was standing in the parking lot, keys in hand, heart pounding like he'd just run a mile. All he had to do was walk through the door, shake a few hands, and give a 10-minute pitch, but his mind was screaming, "You're going to mess this up." That thought had come so many times before, he barely noticed it. But this time he paused. He closed his eyes and chose something different. Just one thought. "I'm the kind of person who rises under pressure." That sentence didn't change the room, the people, or the challenge, but it changed him. And that changed everything. We underestimate how powerful a single thought can be. We assume transformation has to be massive, an epiphany, a breakdown, a life-altering revelation. But more often it starts with one sentence repeated at the right moment. A thought is like a seed. It looks small, even insignificant. But given time, environment, and repetition, it grows into something that reshapes the landscape of your life. One thought, if practiced consistently, can interrupt a pattern, alter behavior, and rewrite identity. The brain doesn't wait for full belief before it starts building. It responds to direction. Tell it something enough times, and it starts making room for it. Think, "I always screw this up," and your mind will serve up every memory that supports that idea. Think, "I'm learning to show up with courage," and it will begin collecting proof. One thought doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be chosen on purpose. Here's the catch: we assume our thoughts are fresh responses to what's happening, but more often, they're reruns. Old lines, familiar scripts. A trigger shows up, an offhand remark, a delay, a look, and your brain reaches into the archive, grabs the usual tape, and hits play. Same reaction. Same story. But it doesn't have to stay on repeat. You don't need a full rewrite. Just a new line. One different sentence, spoken in the same moment where the old one used to live. That's how the loop starts to break. Consider the thought. "I'm not good at this." How many opportunities has that one sentence stolen from people? How many risks weren't taken, conversations avoided, dreams postponed, not because they weren't possible, but because a single thought was repeated enough times to sound like fact? Now flip it. "I'm not good at this yet." That tiny shift creates space. Space invites effort. Effort becomes experience. And over time, the original thought dissolves because it's no longer true. This isn't about blind positivity. You don't have to stand in front of the mirror chanting things you don't believe. It's about inserting a believable, empowering thought that disrupts the old narrative. Something like, "This is hard, but I'm learning," or "Fear means I'm doing something that matters." Thoughts like these are small hinges that swing big doors. Most people try to change their lives by changing their circumstances. New job, new relationship, new schedule. But if the thinking doesn't change, the outcome rarely does. The good news is you don't have to overhaul your entire mindset overnight. You just have to choose one new thought. One idea that feels just a little more empowering than the last one. Practice it. Say it when you don't feel like it. Say it when your brain offers the old one instead. Say it until it starts to sound like you. Because the truth is, you are one thought away from a different decision, and one decision away from a different life. One thought, repeated intentionally, can interrupt an entire identity loop. Thoughts don't need to be perfect, just slightly more empowering than the old ones. Change begins not with action, but with the seed of a new belief. What's one old thought that keeps repeating, and what could you replace it with? Choose a new empowering thought today. Write it down. Say it aloud. Practice it at least 3 times when the old one shows up. Chapter 4. From reaction to rewriting. She didn't mean to snap. But the words came out sharp, defensive, louder than they needed to be. Her coworker had simply asked a question, and suddenly she felt cornered, judged, like a spotlight had been turned on her flaws. Moments later, guilt crept in. "Why do I always do this?" she muttered. It wasn't the first time. The reaction was almost automatic, and that was the problem. It was automatic, but it didn't have to be permanent. Reactions are fast, unfiltered, and often based on old programming. They're the brain's way of conserving energy by pulling from patterns it's used before. You feel tension, and the same thoughts rise. "I'm being attacked. I'm not good enough. I'm going to mess this up." These thoughts trigger emotions which drive behavior. Before you know it, you've lashed out, shut down, or walked away from something important, not because of what's happening now, but because of what's been reinforced before. But here's the shift: between stimulus and response, there's a space, a tiny pause. And in that pause lives your power. Most people don't realize it's there. They've trained themselves to react so quickly that the pause feels non-existent. But if you can slow down just enough to notice it, you can rewrite the script. That's where transformation begins, not in the reaction, but in the rewrite. Rewriting doesn't mean pretending you're calm when you're not. It means catching the moment you start to spiral and inserting a new question, a new perspective, a new thought. Let's say you get critical feedback and your first reaction is shame. Instead of defaulting to "I'm failing," you insert, "What's the opportunity here?" That thought doesn't erase the discomfort, but it redirects your mind. And redirection is the first step toward rewiring. This process takes practice. At first, you'll notice the reaction only after it's over. That's okay. Awareness is progress. Eventually, you'll start noticing it as it happens. Then, if you stay with it, you'll begin noticing it before it happens. That's when you have the chance to choose something different, something better. And every time you choose the rewrite over the reaction, you reinforce a new identity, one that is thoughtful, grounded, and emotionally intelligent. Rewriting isn't about being perfect. It's about being intentional. A trigger doesn't have to lead to an outburst. An awkward moment doesn't have to spiral into self-doubt. A setback doesn't have to become a story of failure. Those reactions may be common, but they're not inevitable. You've practiced them so long they feel like second nature, but you can practice something new. Here's the truth most people miss: reactions feel real because they're fast, not because they're right. Just because a feeling shows up quickly doesn't mean it deserves control. You can slow things down. You can breathe. You can ask, is this reaction serving who I want to become? And if the answer is no, you can rewrite it, not with force, but with presence, not with suppression, but with curiosity. Every rewrite builds a new muscle. And with enough reps, what used to be a reaction becomes a reflection. What used to be a spiral becomes a moment of clarity. And what used to be automatic becomes intentional. That's how you change, one pause, one choice, one rewritten moment at a time. Reactions are learned patterns, but they're not unchangeable. Between trigger and response is a pause where choice lives. Practicing new responses leads to new identity pathways. What reaction do you default to that no longer serves who you want to become? When you feel triggered today, pause for 3 seconds. In that space, choose one new thought that leads to a different response. Chapter 5. Stacking Evidence. He didn't feel brave. His hands were sweating, his voice shaky, and his thoughts racing. But he still raised his hand in the meeting, just once. A simple comment, barely a sentence, no applause, no spotlight, just a quiet contribution, but something clicked. He'd done the thing he usually avoided. And when he walked out of that room, he carried something more important than confidence. He carried evidence. Confidence isn't a trait. It's a conclusion. And like all conclusions, it's built on evidence. The problem is most people are stacking evidence in the wrong direction. They remember the times they froze, the feedback that stung, the risks that didn't go as planned. Their brain records those moments like court transcripts and plays them back any time they consider stepping forward. So they stay quiet. They play small, not because they're incapable, but because their inner courtroom keeps ruling against them. What they don't realize is they can present new evidence. Every time you take a small action aligned with the identity you want, you are building a case for that future version of yourself. You speak up once, and your brain takes note. You follow through on a promise, and your mind records it. You face something you usually avoid, and suddenly, the narrative starts to shift. Maybe I'm not the kind of person who always backs down. That's how identity is built, not through one massive breakthrough, but through a stack of quiet wins. The brain loves proof. It wants consistency between what you believe and what you do. When your actions align with a new belief, your mind begins to adjust the story. The key is to make the proof undeniable, even if it's small. One gym session doesn't make you an athlete. But if you go even when you don't feel like it, that action says something powerful. This matters to me. And when done repeatedly, it starts to sound like, this is who I am. Here's where most people get stuck. They wait to feel confident before acting. But confidence doesn't come before action. It's the reward for taking action. You don't have to believe fully, you just have to move. Even a shaky, hesitant step counts. The goal is not perfection, it's momentum. Each step becomes a data point. And over time, those data points become identity. Think of it like building a wall. Each action is a brick. The stronger the foundation, the higher you can go. You're not just stacking habits, you're stacking stories. Stories that say, I follow through, I try again. I don't let fear steer. The more stories you have, the harder it becomes for self-doubt to win the argument. This is not about ego. It's about truth. You don't need to puff yourself up or fake belief. You need to remember what you've already survived, what you've already done. That time you kept going, that moment you showed up, even when it was hard. Stack that. Remind yourself of it. Use it. You don't have to be fully transformed to act like it. You just need one piece of proof. Then another, and another. Because the more evidence you stack, the more your identity has no choice but to rise in agreement. That's how people change. Not by waiting but by walking, even if it's just one step at a time. Confidence is built by collecting small wins that support your desired identity. The brain adjusts identity based on repeated evidence, not intentions. Momentum matters more than motivation. Stack actions and belief will follow. What small action could you take today that supports the identity you want to build? Do one thing today that contradicts your old narrative, and write it down as proof of who you're becoming. Chapter 6. Becoming on Purpose. Most people drift into their identity. They don't choose who they become, they absorb it. From their environment, their upbringing, their past failures, their peers. Like a boat without a rudder, they float wherever the current of life pulls them. One day they wake up and say, I guess this is just who I am now, never realizing they've been building that identity one passive thought at a time. But becoming isn't passive. It's not something that happens to you, it's something you do on purpose. The truth is, you are always becoming something. Every repeated thought is casting a vote. Every belief you accept is tightening the mold. Every action you tolerate is reinforcing a direction. The question is, are you becoming by design or by default? Identity doesn't ask for your permission. It forms based on repetition. But the power is in your hands. You can hijack the process and begin choosing who you're becoming instead of inheriting it. This begins with clarity. Who do you want to be? Not what job title or what other people admire. Who deep down do you want to become? Is it someone confident, kind, bold, disciplined, resilient? Pick one. Make it clear. Then reverse engineer it. Ask, what does that person think when they wake up? How do they respond to setbacks? What kind of inner dialogue runs through their mind when things go wrong? Because the identity you want to have is already living inside the mindset you choose. Most people try to change their identity with external achievements. They think, if I lose the weight, make the money, or get the promotion, then I'll finally feel like the person I want to be. But real identity work is internal first. It's about rehearsing the thoughts before the evidence exists. You don't become disciplined because you hit the gym for 90 days. You become disciplined when you start thinking like a disciplined person, long before the abs show up. It's not fake. It's formation. That's the quiet magic of becoming on purpose. You don't have to announce it to the world. You don't need a dramatic reinvention. You just start choosing thoughts that align with who you want to be, over and over. When the self-doubt voice rises up, you meet it with your chosen identity. When fear whispers that you're not enough, you answer with the belief that growth is possible. You keep rehearsing until the script changes. And yes, it will feel awkward at first. You'll feel like you're pretending. But pretending is different from practicing. Pretending is dishonest. Practicing is deliberate. You're not faking confidence, you're rehearsing it. You're not faking discipline, you're building it. Every day you show up to your thoughts, you're laying bricks. It may not look like much at first, but over time, the architecture of your identity becomes visible. Becoming on purpose is about ownership. It's refusing to outsource your sense of self to your past, your critics, or your circumstances. It's about saying, I get to decide who I am becoming, and then living each day like you mean it. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because that's when the bricks matter most. You can't always control your environment, your past, or your emotions. But you can control what you think. And what you think, consistently, becomes who you are. That's the power, and the responsibility, of becoming on purpose. Identity forms through repetition. Becoming is constant, even when unintentional. Practicing the mindset of the person you want to be builds that identity over time. You don't fake who you want to become, you practice it, on purpose, until it's true. Who are you becoming right now, based on your most repeated thoughts? Write down one identity trait you want to build. Then rehearse a thought today that person would believe. Chapter 7. The Silent Sculptor. There was no dramatic moment, no flash of lightning, no sudden shift. But years later, he realized he barely recognized himself. He used to be timid, unsure, hesitant to speak up or take chances. Now, he was leading meetings, setting boundaries, trusting his own decisions. People called it growth, confidence, maturity. But he knew the truth. It wasn't a leap. It was a long, slow carving. Not of circumstances, but of thought. Like a sculptor shaping stone, his mind had been silently working on him all along. That's how identity actually changes, not in fireworks, but in whispers. Most people expect transformation to feel immediate and noticeable. But the most powerful changes often happen gradually, invisibly. A thought repeated becomes a belief reinforced becomes a habit practiced becomes behavior, and behavior, repeated without question, hardens into identity. It doesn't feel like change, it feels like truth, but at its core, it's just repetition. Imagine your mind as a chisel, and every thought as a stroke against the marble of who you are becoming. At first, it's subtle. No one sees the difference. You don't even see the difference. But over time, the lines begin to deepen. The shape begins to emerge. If your repeated thoughts are self-critical, insecure, or afraid, they will carve those patterns into the stone, not because they're true, but because they're repeated. That's the danger of unexamined thought. We assume it's harmless because it's quiet. But quiet doesn't mean powerless. The mind doesn't wait for you to pay attention before it starts forming conclusions. It simply responds to what you rehearse. Think I'm not a leader often enough, and your mind will go to work shaping a person who avoids leadership. Think I always bounce back, and your mind will start carving the resilience to match. This is happening whether you notice it or not. The sculptor never sleeps. It's working while you're scrolling social media, reacting to emails, talking to yourself on the drive home. And that's why awareness matters. You can't stop the sculptor, but you can hand it new tools. You can feed it new words. You can direct it toward a different shape. The most powerful question you can ask yourself is, what am I carving right now? In moments of frustration, fear, or shame, what patterns are you reinforcing? And are they aligned with the person you want to become? If not, you have the right, and the responsibility, to interrupt the stroke, or to pick a new thought. To make a different cut. And just like real sculpting, you don't need massive swings, you need consistency. One thought, carved in daily. One belief, returned to in quiet moments. One decision, made differently today than it would have been a year ago. Over time, the lines deepen. The shape changes. The old form disappears. And a new self begins to emerge, not invented, but revealed. Because that's the beautiful paradox, you're not forcing yourself into a new identity. You're uncovering one that's been there all along, hidden beneath the noise, waiting for your thoughts to chisel it free. The silent sculptor is always working. The only question is, what are you instructing it to create? Identity is shaped gradually by repeated thoughts, not sudden events. Your thoughts are chisels, carving invisible patterns into who you become. Awareness allows you to guide the sculptor toward the version of you want to reveal. What thought pattern are you carving most often, and is it shaping the identity you want? Pause once today and ask, what am I carving right now? Then choose a thought that shapes you with intention. Chapter 8. The Thought Identity Loop. He didn't realize he was trapped in a loop until someone named it. You keep saying you're not a leader, his mentor said, but every time you avoid leading, you reinforce that belief. And the more you believe it, the more you avoid it. It hit him like a punch to the chest, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He wasn't just repeating a belief, he was recycling an identity, and every loop made it stronger. This is how most people live, caught in what psychologists call a cognitive feedback loop. You think a thought, act on it, and then interpret the result as evidence that the thought was true. It feels like truth. It feels like reality. But often, it's just repetition dressed up as certainty. The belief fuels the behavior, and the behavior reinforces the belief. Around and around it goes. Until you can't tell which came first, the thought or the identity. Take someone who thinks, "I'm terrible at public speaking." That thought triggers anxiety, which leads them to decline speaking opportunities. When they avoid those opportunities, they never gain skill or confidence, which reinforces the original thought. The brain registers that avoidance as confirmation. See? You're just not built for this. It feels logical, but it's a closed loop that never gives you the chance to grow. The loop isn't the problem. The problem is letting it run unchecked. The brain loves patterns. It doesn't care if they're empowering or limiting, it just wants to be efficient. So if you feed it the same thought, it will build roads to support it. That's great when the thought is useful. It's dangerous when it's not. Because the longer you live inside a loop, the more invisible it becomes. It doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like personality. But here's the good news: every loop can be broken. And it doesn't take a breakthrough, it takes an interruption. A new thought, injected into the cycle, has the power to derail the pattern. Instead of saying, "I'm terrible at this," you say, "I'm learning how to do this better." That one shift changes your emotional response. It opens the door to action. Maybe you try, maybe you stumble, but now your brain sees something new, evidence of growth. And just like that, a new loop begins. This is the foundation of identity transformation. You don't change who you are by force. You change the loop. Insert a new thought. Reinforce it with new action. And let the new action feed back into the belief. The more you repeat the process, the more your brain begins to accept the new narrative. Not because it's been perfectly proven, but because it's been practiced. Think of your identity as a thermostat, not a thermometer. A thermometer just reflects the temperature. A thermostat sets it. If your internal belief says, "I'm average," your behavior will find ways to return to average. But when you intentionally reset the thought, "I bring value, I lead with purpose, I grow through discomfort," you begin to act accordingly. And those actions reinforce the identity. The thermostat rises. You're never stuck with a belief just because it's familiar. You're not obligated to stay inside a loop that no longer serves you. You can break it. Better yet, you can rewrite it, thought by thought, choice by choice, until your loop becomes a ladder, and it starts lifting you toward the version of yourself you were always meant to be. Thoughts and behaviors create feedback loops that reinforce identity. Interrupting the loop with new thoughts and actions builds new beliefs. You can shift from repeating limitations to reinforcing growth, one choice at a time. What identity loop have you been reinforcing without realizing it? Identify one limiting loop you're in. Replace the recurring thought with one that opens a new action today. Chapter 9. Brain on Belief. She stared at the email for 5 minutes before closing her laptop. It was an opportunity, one she would have dreamed about a year ago, but all she could hear in her head was, "You're not ready." The words weren't loud, they were quiet. Familiar. Convincing. She didn't even argue, she just let them decide for her. What she didn't know was that her brain was simply doing its job, protecting her based on a belief it had been trained to follow. Her thoughts weren't random, they were patterns, and those patterns had rewired her brain. Belief isn't just philosophical, it's biological. The brain isn't a fixed organ. It changes in response to experience, thought, and behavior. This process is called neuroplasticity. It means your mental wiring is not set in stone. It's flexible, moldable, constantly adapting to whatever you feed it most often. Think the same thought enough times and your brain will begin prioritizing it, reinforcing it, and filtering the world through it. When you say, "I'm not good under pressure," your brain hears that as instruction. It begins tagging stressful situations as threats. It releases cortisol, shortens your breath, narrows your focus. And when you freeze or stumble, your brain logs that as confirmation. "See?" it says. "We were right." The wiring strengthens, the loop closes, the belief deepens. But here's the twist: the same mechanism that builds limiting beliefs can also build empowering ones. When you begin saying, "Pressure brings out my clarity," or "I learn best in real time," your brain doesn't laugh it off. It listens. Slowly, the nervous system adapts, the fear response lessens. Your body calibrates. Your mind begins looking for ways to confirm the new input. That's neuroplasticity at work, and it doesn't care whether your belief is helpful or harmful. It just builds what you repeat. This isn't magic, it's repetition. The more a neural pathway is activated, the more insulated and automatic it becomes. It's like carving a trail in a forest. The first few walks are difficult. But over time, with enough use, it becomes the path of least resistance. Your brain prefers ease. Once a thought has been rehearsed enough, it becomes reflex. You won't even realize you're thinking it. That's why belief is so powerful and so dangerous, because it feels natural. It feels like fact. But often, it's just a well-worn pathway carved by fear, shame, or misunderstanding. The brain doesn't fact-check your beliefs. It just obeys them. That's why changing your identity begins with changing what you repeat. You're not trying to lie to yourself. You're trying to give your brain a new assignment. Start small. Instead of "I'm terrible at this," try "I'm getting better every time I try." Instead of "I never follow through," say "I'm building follow through with every small win." You may not believe it yet. That's okay. Belief doesn't arrive first, practice does. Your job isn't to feel it perfectly. Your job is to feed your brain the kind of thoughts that shape the identity you actually want. Every thought you think leaves a footprint in your brain. One thought won't change your life, but the thoughts you practice most will, and over time, your brain will adapt to support them. That's not optimism. That's anatomy. This is your brain on belief, and you get to choose the signal it listens to. Your brain rewires itself based on the thoughts you repeat most. This is neuroplasticity. Beliefs become automatic patterns that shape behavior and identity. You can reprogram your mindset by feeding your brain intentional, empowering thoughts. What belief have you practiced so often that your brain now treats it as fact? Choose one empowering belief and repeat it 3 times today, aloud, in writing, and in thought, to begin rewiring your response. Chapter 10. Mindset Hygiene. He never missed a workout. 5 days a week, early morning, same gym, same routine. He tracked his meals, drank water, took his vitamins. From the outside, he looked like the definition of discipline. But when things went wrong, missed deadlines, relationship friction, financial stress, his thoughts unraveled. "I can't handle this. This always happens to me. I'm not cut out for more." His body was fit, but his mind was untrained. That's when it hit him. He had physical hygiene, but no mindset hygiene. He'd been brushing his teeth, but ignoring his thoughts. We all understand the importance of basic hygiene. We shower, wash our hands, and clean our homes, not because we're dirty people, but because if we neglect these things, problems build up. The same principle applies to the mind. You may not always feel the damage immediately, but over time, unfiltered input, unchecked thoughts, and unresolved emotions create mental plaque. They clog clarity, weaken belief, and erode confidence. Left unattended, mindset decay becomes identity drift. Most people treat their minds like open fields. Anything can walk through: news, gossip, negativity, comparison, fear, and take up residence. But your mind isn't a public park, it's a garden. And gardens require tending. If you don't plant on purpose, weeds grow by default. Your dominant thoughts are a reflection of what you allow in, what you replay, and what you never question. Mindset hygiene is the practice of taking responsibility for all 3. This starts with your inputs. What are you feeding your mind? What content are you consuming? Who do you spend time with? What conversations are you rehearsing? Most people don't realize how much influence these inputs have on their internal dialogue. A 5-minute scroll can plant seeds of scarcity, comparison, and insecurity that echo all day. A careless comment can spiral into self-doubt if you don't catch it in time. Hygiene means noticing these influences before they take root. Next is your environment. Is it helping or hurting your mindset? Some environments are cluttered, not just physically, but emotionally. They invite distraction, feed anxiety, and blur your vision. Sometimes hygiene means cleaning the space where you think. Sometimes it means stepping away from voices that speak fear louder than faith. It's not about becoming rigid or controlling, it's about becoming intentional. A healthy mindset doesn't happen by accident. Finally, there's the inner loop. What are you saying to yourself when no one's watching? What thought do you wake up with and carry to bed? Mindset hygiene means noticing the loops and deciding which ones deserve airtime. Some thoughts aren't worthy of repetition. Just because they show up doesn't mean they get to stay. The mind is powerful, but it's also programmable. If a thought doesn't serve the identity you're building, you have permission to delete it. This isn't about perfection. It's about prevention. Just like brushing your teeth doesn't guarantee you'll never get a cavity, practicing mindset hygiene doesn't mean you'll never struggle. But it does mean you'll struggle less. You'll recover faster. You'll have tools ready when the negative thoughts come. And they will come. But when they do, you won't panic, you'll clean. You wouldn't skip weeks of sleep and expect to feel sharp, so why go weeks without checking your thoughts? A few minutes a day, clearing, checking, choosing, can mean the difference between staying stuck and stepping forward. Your mind is your most valuable space. Treat it like it's sacred. Because it is. Mindset hygiene is the daily practice of managing your mental inputs and inner dialogue. Unchecked thoughts and influences create clutter that shapes identity. A healthy mind is built by design, not default, and requires consistent care. What unfiltered input or recurring thought have you been allowing to pollute your mindset? Set aside 5 minutes today to check in with your thoughts. Name one you're ready to remove and one you want to reinforce. Chapter 11. Choose your inner narrator. It wasn't the mistake that broke her. It was the voice that followed it. The one that said, typical. You always screw things up. It didn't yell. It didn't insult. It just whispered. Familiar. Quiet. Constant. She didn't question it. Why would she? That voice had always been there. But one day, someone asked her, whose voice is that, really? And for the first time, she realized it wasn't hers. It was borrowed, from past criticism, old pain, unchallenged beliefs, and she had a choice. She could keep letting that voice narrate her life, or she could choose a new one. Every one of us has an inner narrator. It's the voice in your head explaining what things mean. When you fail, it tells you why. When someone cancels plans, it offers a theory. When you try something new, it judges your readiness. Most of us assume this voice is just our thoughts, but it's more than that. It's the storyteller of our identity, and that story shapes everything. The narrator doesn't just describe what happens. It defines who you are. When something goes wrong and your narrator says, "You're such a mess," that's not commentary, it's construction. That voice is shaping how you see yourself, how you behave, and how you respond to life. If your narrator leans negative, your identity will follow. If it speaks from fear, your decisions will echo it. But the good news is, you're not stuck with the voice you started with. Narrators can be replaced. Start by listening, noticing. What tone does your inner voice use when you make a mistake? Is it compassionate or cruel? Does it sound like someone rooting for you or someone tearing you down? Often we internalize voices from our past, parents, teachers, critics, and assume their truth. But many of those voices weren't wise. They were wounded. They weren't shaping you. They were projecting their own pain. And now you've made them part of your story. You don't need a new personality to change your inner voice. You need a new narrator. One who speaks with truth and kindness. One who tells the whole story, not just the flaw. One who says, "That was a misstep, not a definition," or "This is hard, but you're growing." The goal isn't fake positivity, it's accurate storytelling. Life is complex. You need a narrator who reflects that complexity with hope, not harshness. Choosing your narrator means becoming intentional with self-talk. It's noticing when your voice goes rogue and correcting it. It's saying, "Actually, that's not true," when the old scripts rise. It's pausing to ask, "What would a supportive mentor say to me right now?" Then adopting that tone. At first it will feel unfamiliar, like wearing someone else's words. But over time, it becomes your voice, because you practiced it into existence. You can't mute the mind, but you can teach it a new language. Every time you speak to yourself with clarity, compassion, and courage, you're installing a better narrator. One who understands where you're going and narrates the journey accordingly. The more you reinforce this voice, the more your identity rises to match it. Your self-talk becomes your self-perception, and your self-perception becomes your reality. You don't have to believe everything your old narrator says. You can rewrite the script. Choose a voice that builds, not breaks, one that speaks from belief, not baggage. The story you're telling yourself is the life you're living. Make sure it's a good one. Your inner narrator defines how you interpret life and build identity. Negative self-talk often comes from unchallenged, inherited voices. You can retrain your inner voice to speak with clarity, compassion, and truth. What tone does your inner narrator use, and is it building the version of you that you want? Catch one negative self-comment today, and rephrase it like a supportive mentor would. Speak to yourself like someone worth believing in. Take care and be well.